Hi, this is Lori, and I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss some topics from Chapter 3, Administrative Agency Discretion. And in large part, this chapter is about how agencies decide to implement or carry out their power. How do they decide how to prosecute causes of action? Which rules should they implement? What kind of policy will they establish for dealing with citizens at their administrative agency? So in this chapter, you are going to identify 3 forms of commonly exercised discretion. You should think about and know at the end of this chapter what are advisory opinions as compared to declaratory orders. You can also think about how an informal process in an administrative agency becomes the lifeblood of that actual process, or I should say of that administration. And be able to think about why, if the discretion is too limited, it becomes really a broad way of giving power, or I should say if it's too much discretion, it becomes arbitrary. If it's too little, it's inflexible. And I'll talk about some examples of that with me as a hearing officer. And you should be able to think about this in real life scenarios. So starting off with the introduction, or I should say beginning this, a great majority of agency actions are informal. And that's one reason this topic becomes one about discretion, is because in an administrative agency, a lot of what happens is what goes on every day, not necessarily at a hearing, not necessarily in the process of enacting rules and regulations. So for example, every day at the toll authority, supervisors and customer service reps are dealing with owners of vehicles on purchasing I-passes, malfunctioning I-passes, when the lanes or equipment on the lanes are not working, when people have missed tolls, when they have paid money for missed tolls, but the toll authority can't track that down. What happens when someone thought they had an active I-pass and it's no longer, but they were still charged. There are lots of different conflicts that arise that the administrative agency has to resolve. And the reason this is different than, let's say, McDonald's customer service is because this is a government entity. And the rules and regulations of that entity should be as such that pretty much everything that happens in that administrative agency should be reflective of those rules and regulations and the power that was granted to the agency through its enabling statute. Otherwise, what happens is that citizens group then sue the administrative agencies for abusing its discretionary power or engaging in some sort of discriminatory conduct against its very own public. Think about discretion in 2 ways. Too much discretion leads to something being arbitrary, and if it's not enough discretion, then it becomes inflexible. And the challenge for an administrative agency is to find a satisfactory middle ground and to use that discretion in a way that is fair. So for example, and I'll have you think about what would you do. As a toll authority hearing officer, whenever I preside over hearings, I hear litigants provide a lot of reasons why they should not be liable. The laws that govern our proceedings are strict liability laws, which means very, very little explanations can actually lead to someone being found not liable. But if the law was not strict liability, then the different reasons given would be left to the hearing officer to decide, is that a justifiable reason for not paying a toll. So for example, if it were you and you had the discretion and these were the excuses, what would you do? Some of the following are excuses. That 1, the driver says, I was new to Illinois, I'm a new driver, I don't understand the tollway, I didn't intend to create a violation. The next litigant says, I just loaned my car to my 17-year-old son. He's a new driver. He really didn't understand the tollway. It's not my fault. The car is registered in my name, but he's the driver. I'm not the one who didn't pay the tolls. The next litigant says, I was driving, my kids were in the back seat, they were fighting, they were screaming, and I just didn't realize that I went through 3 toll violations. Someone else says, I was really distracted because I had just been diagnosed with cancer. Another driver says, I didn't understand the tollway, plus my GPS told me to stay to the left. I didn't realize that I was supposed to get to the right to pay for the toll. Another driver says, I was on my way to a funeral. I didn't think that I had to pay the toll when I was going to a funeral. Someone else says, that was my father. He was a senior citizen. He's a little senile, and I think he just forgot to pay. And the list goes on. And so if the law was not strict enough, then arguably hearing officers could decide which, if any, of those reasons are reasons to excuse someone. Another very popular one is that the traffic was so heavy that the person couldn't get over, or that the weather was so bad. I've heard people say that the snow and the ice covered the signs, and it was slippery, and they couldn't safely get over to the next lane. Those are the kinds of explanations that hearing officers could take into consideration if some of our discretion was not limited. And having broad discretion to consider those kind of explanations would certainly lead to, I think, some sort of non-fair decisions. Sort of like sympathy decisions, which is not what you want an administrative agency hearing officer making a decision based on some sort of sympathy. On the flip side to that, if it's strict enforcement of the rules, then it could be that the spirit of the rule isn't met. So, for example, sometimes a driver may say that he threw the money in the basket but didn't come to a complete stop. And so in that instance, as the hearing officer, I have to determine that the person actually paid the toll and just didn't stop. And if that's the case, the violation that they're here before me is not running the stop sign, is failure to pay the toll. The spirit of the law is to have that person pay the toll, or to have him pay a fine for failure to pay the toll, not failure to stop at the stop sign. Another way to look at if the spirit of the rule is met is if someone's car was stolen, then certainly they shouldn't be liable. If the plates were still on the car and the person who stole the car was the one running the tolls. Rental cars and valet drivers or repair shop. Sometimes I may get a driver who says, and has proof, some sort of receipt and so forth, that says, yes, I put my car with a valet driver on that date. Here's my receipt, only to realize that, wow, the car was with the valet driver, what the valet person was on a joyride. Or sometimes very, very numerous times, people have come with copies of receipts and proof to say, my car was at the repair shop when that was happening, which suggests that the people at the repair shop had the vehicle out on the tollway. The spirit of the law really isn't to punish the registered owner of the vehicle when that happens. So that's another way we have to have some flexibility when incidents arise that were not foreseeable at the time the rules and regulations or policies were implemented. Another, example of an administrative discretion, how to carry it out, is an agency has to determine how to prosecute or when to prosecute or what to prosecute. For example, even at the toll authority, they have to make a decision. Are they going to prosecute for violations in the open road tolling lanes, the I-pass only lanes, or the automatic coin machines, or all three? Should they wait until the driver has missed 2 tolls, 3 tolls, 5 tolls, 10 tolls, 15 tolls? Should they send a notice after a year or after 2 years? That is left in their prosecutorial discretion on how to prosecute their causes of action. An agency that is delegated rulemaking authority has the discretion to promulgate what rules it finds necessary. An example of that would be the IRS, the EPA, OSHA, or even the toll authority. Another example of discretion is deciding what kind of tests and inspections that may be needed. Example of that kind of agency would be the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, or OSHA, in terms of deciding what needs to be tested. When should those tests occur? What kind of inspections? Do they have to have a warrant? Do they have to have a notice? Can they just show up at the workplace? Another one, or I should say you should become familiar with advisory opinions and declaratory orders. This comes about when laws are ambiguous and vague, and citizens want to know what to anticipate. So upon a request from a person regulated, so let's say a taxpayer, can ask for an advisory opinion. An advisory opinion is saying, hypothetically, if this exists, what would your administration agency do? And the advisory opinion would give just that, expressing its interpretation of a law or explaining its policy and practices that can become binding on the administrative agency. A declaratory order. The Administrative Procedure Act provides that an agency, in its sound discretion, may use this order to terminate a controversy or remove uncertainty. So if there are conflicts arising about how a rule shall be applied, then the order can clear that up, and that solves any uncertainty. So that's something that the agency can take authority on. Other ways of exercising its discretion would be through mediation and arbitration. Some agencies have the responsibility to do that. The EEOC is one of the agencies that allows for mediation, to allow, for example, the employer and employee to try to mediate a cause of action. Likewise with arbitration. And that pretty much brings me to the end of this presentation. So I've highlighted the major concepts and maybe some examples to help you think about what discretion means and how is that carried out. I used the examples from the perspective of a hearing officer, but this could again reach the rulemaking process as well as the enforcement process. And every administrative agency has its three branches of government in it: the lawmaking, the judicial, and the executive. And in each of those ways, they have to find a fair way to use their discretion. That would be the objective. So good luck with the rest of this week. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me.